This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace. A one-legged cabinet is pretty impractical. It's inefficient, it's not the most robust design, it's just kind of stupid. I can't deny it, but neither can anyone else. Because when you walk into a room and you see this thing, you'll definitely say, what the f***? So I'm sure I'm going to get the question, why are you building a one-legged cabinet, quite a bit, so I figured I'd just address it right off the bat. Truthfully, I don't know. Most of my projects are built out of necessity. Either I need something or a client needs something. This one wasn't. This one's really just about an idea that I wanted to explore. An idea that I knew wasn't really going to be great going in. But I thought it could still be fun and that I might make a few discoveries along the way. So honestly, I don't even really know where I'm going to use this thing. I guess I'll just kind of hold on to it for a while and eventually it'll find a home. Anyway, what you've been watching me do in the last couple shots is roughing out the pieces for the box portion of the cabinet. Here I'm ripping some really thin hardwood strips to put on the front edge of the cabinet to cover up the plywood. To attach them, I'm just using a little bit of tape and glue. I have some clamps that are actually meant for this exact purpose, but these strips are pretty thin and I think they might be a little bit too delicate for the clamps. Same holds true for using a finish nailer. I purposely left the strips a good amount longer than they were going to end up needing to be. That's why you see me cutting it short of the plywood here. If you leave it longer or even as long as the plywood, it makes finalizing the bevel cuts on the table saw quite a bit harder. Here I'm cutting the bevels for the box. Now you see the reason that I cut the strips a little short, so that I end up with a nice flat edge that I can rest against the fence. Next I made a rabbet in the back panel. Now you might be wondering why I'm cutting it so deep. Well, it's because I'm going to glue in a back panel that will leave about 3/4 of an inch recess in the back, basically a 3/4 inch hollow spot. The hollow section is there so that I can temporarily install the cabinet for the shots at the end. Like I said before, I don't know where this thing's going to live, so I don't want to attach it to a wall yet. In hindsight, I probably could have done this more simply, but, well, hindsight's 20/20. And as you've probably guessed by looking at me and my logo, my vision isn't. To glue the box up, I started off using the tape method that you've seen me use a few times already. I don't know if I had unsticky tape or maybe I just didn't clean the sawdust off my pieces before I started taping, but for whatever reason, I didn't get as good of adhesion as I normally get. I had everything ready to go, and I was folding it all up and putting glue on it, but I just didn't really like the way that it was coming out, so I kind of had to switch strategies mid-glue up. In this shot, you can see that I took everything apart and now I'm just wiping off all the glue with water so that I can redo it. A bit later, I reconvened and used my domino instead. After the glue dried, I installed the back panel. So with the box out of the way, I started in on the base. I didn't really need a ton of wood here since it's just one leg that I'm making, so I took a small chunk from a 6/4 piece of stock that I had lying around. Hope you like what you're seeing so far. If you are, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thanks. Also be sure to follow me on Instagram. That's the best way to check out what I'm doing before it makes its way to the YouTubes. At its widest point at the top, the leg tapers to 2 by 2 inches. So I had to rip a couple strips and laminate them together so that I could get a piece that was going to be thick enough. Now I know that a lot of you like to complain about how sparingly you think that I use glue, so, well, Merry Christmas. At this point, the piece was quite a bit larger than it was going to end up, so I cleaned up everything on the joiner so that I'd have a nice blank to work with. Then I cross-cut the piece to rough length. Then I cut the whole thing to 2 by 2 inches on the table saw so that I could start marking out my tapers. This first mark is on the top of the leg. Once it's finished, the taper will end about 3/4 of an inch from the top. Now, everything came out fine, but if I had to do it over again, next time I would leave the top flat part a few extra inches longer than I needed it, and then just lop it off after all the tapers were cut. I think that would make it a lot easier to work with. Here I'm marking in a 1/2 inch on either side, so that the leg can end up tapering from 1 by 1 at the bottom to the aforementioned 2 by 2 at the top. Then I set up my tapering jig and cut all 4 sides. This was actually the first time that I'd ever cut a 4-sided taper, but it was actually pretty easy. The only real trick is to save some of the offcuts so that you can use them as wedges to stabilize the piece when you're cutting the last tapers. After the leg was ready, I went ahead and attached it to the cabinet. Here I'm finding the center of the cabinet, and then I marked out a 2 by 2 square. Then I glued it on. For those of you who've seen my Let's Talk About Design videos, you know that I don't like the look of legs just coming out of a cabinet. I always feel like there's something missing whenever I see that. So here I'm creating this, sort of surround molding kind of thing to help ease the transition. Once I had the molding pieces cut to shape and rough length, I started installing them. I set up my table saw to cut a 45-degree on one end and my miter saw to cut a 45-degree on the other end. I pretty much just worked my way around the 4 sides, measuring and cutting to sneak up on the right fit until it was done. Truthfully, the last piece didn't fit as well as I would have liked it to. There's some little gaps, but it's on the back underside, so pretty inconspicuous. Here I'm making my drawer box. I've gone over this a few times already. In fact, I have a whole video dedicated to making really simple drawer boxes. I'll link to it below so that you can check it out if you haven't seen it already. In short though, the secret's really just coming up with a system that helps you keep everything true and square. Speaking of square, Squarespace. So I've used Squarespace for a few different website needs in the past. Most recently, I transitioned my 4 Eyes website over to Squarespace. Now, there's a multitude of reasons to consider doing this. They have awesome award-winning templates and really great 24/7 customer service. Personally speaking though, the reason I made the switch was ease of use. See, I want to start utilizing my website more, and while I know how to code websites, it's not what I'm good at. And any time I spend working on the website is time that I spend not doing what I am good at, building furniture. In short, using Squarespace lets me have an awesome, great-looking, highly functionable website with a fraction of the time and energy it would require somebody like me to do it on my own. So if you're thinking about a new website, or even if you have an existing one, seriously, check them out. You can start your free trial today at squarespace.com/4eyes to get 10% off your first purchase. I put a link in the description. Check them out. Alright, so we're jumping around in time here a bit, as evidenced by the fact that the base isn't attached yet in this shot. Pay no mind. I just thought that the build might make more sense to people if I talked about the sections in chunks rather than as they actually happened chronologically. That should also explain the multiple wardrobe changes. Anyway, to fit the drawer, I started by cutting it just small enough to fit into the opening. In the end, I'm going to want the gaps to be the width of these little scrap pieces that I made. So with the front fit in, I jam it as far as I can to one side, then I get 2 of my scraps and mark out how much material needs to be removed. I do this on the top and one side. After I've made the cuts, I put the face back in, and using my spacers I make sure that everything's good to go. Sometimes the gaps won't be even because maybe your box isn't perfectly square or whatever, so this is kind of your last chance to try to get things to pass the eyeball test. With that done, the last thing that I wanted to do before installing the drawer face was to kind of play around with some detail. So after I had cut in the negative space for the handle, I put a few grooves in the door that were about 3/4 of an inch wide. I'll be honest, I don't know how much I love it on this particular project, but I think it could have some application somewhere at some time. I want to take a second to thank all of my Patreon members. New to the list this month are Tim, Gabe, Aaron, Harry, Winfield, and Gregory. I gotta be honest, without you guys, I wouldn't have a leg to stand on. So thank you for that. If you want to know how you can support the show too, I'll throw a link to my Patreon page in the description. If you're interested, check it out. And as always, no pressure. So, as I had said before, I'm really not exactly sure what I'm going to end up doing with this piece. I guess I'm just going to kind of hang on to it for a while and see what happens. I don't know, maybe I'll make another equally weird piece and then use the pair as end tables or something. Either way, as useless and goofy of a project as this may have been, I'm still really glad that I did it. I learned a lot along the way. If Clark W. Griswold has taught me one thing, it's that life isn't always about the destination. Sometimes it's about the journey. Well, that and don't buy a family truckster from Eugene Levy. See you next time.